just comparing pay packages is our weapon.
Yeah.
Weapon, I say that casually, but it's like our tool to help us not get taken advantage of. Just talk to a couple of recruiters and see what different people are offering. And that's your advantage. Your advantage is actually hearing what people are willing to pay you. Hello and welcome to episode 10 of the Nomadicare Show.
Double digits.
We made it to double digits. I think only a small percentage of podcasts do that. So we're on a roll.
We're elite.
We're elite.
Yeah.
This makes us elite. All right. What is the question of the day, Jacob?
All right. So question of the day comes from our Facebook group. My recruiter said they are contractually not allowed to share the bill rate with me. Is that true?
Cool. So the bill rate is the amount of money that the facility is paying the staffing agency in order to cover the cost of the staffing agency and to pay for the traveler to come. It's considered an all-inclusive rate. So if you were the hospital, you get to pay one number per hour, and that covers everything. Workers' comp, taxes, the cost of the staffing agency, and the traveler. That's just what you pay for it all.
Yeah.
Travelers sometimes want to know the bill rate because it just helps them with transparency to know, am I getting paid fair? But what the traveler has to know is, what does it mean to get paid fair, aka what is a reasonable amount for the staffing agency to keep for them to even know what to do with that number.
Yeah.
So, but travelers are getting more educated. They're understanding the number more. And one of the reasons the staffing agencies historically haven't liked to share that number is because it's just a big conversation. And sometimes that's just not quite worth the time for the recruiter to have to explain a conversation that could take half an hour or an hour just to explain bill rates and where does all the money go and how much should you get and things like that. But as travelers are educating themselves more and more, and they already kind of get it, we're seeing more recruiters being like, I'll share the bill rate with you. And we can look at this together, and then I can show you how much money my company has to keep and show you how much you get, and you can look at the spread with me. The question is, a lot of recruiters will say, we are not allowed to tell you. Contractually, inside of the contract with the facility and us, it says you cannot share the bill rate. And is that true or false? That's what the traveler wants to know, it sounds like. So I'd say sometimes it's false. I'd probably say most of the time it's false, that it's not explicitly written in the contract. You cannot share the bill rate with the clinician. I would say sometimes it's probably true. I bet there are contracts out there that it explicitly says that. I would say more often than not, it's probably vague, like a gray area. Like there's probably a section in the contract that says, we don't share proprietary information of each other's, which is like a standard contract. Say, if by doing business with you, you see proprietary information such as pay rates or marketing documents or trade secrets, they keep it pretty vague. You will not share it. So then that could be up for interpretation. Does a bill rate fall under that, or does it not fall under that?
Yeah, it could also be like a company policy, right? So leadership at the agency, it says, hey, we don't share the bill rate. It's against our rules.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think that's more likely that the company itself has a policy and they explicitly tell the recruiters, you should not share the bill rate. At our company, we don't share the bill rate. And so then the recruiter has to decide, do I go against my company policy to appease the traveler's request, or do I stay true to what the company told me to do?
Yeah.
And some recruiters just break the rules, and then some of them don't. Some companies probably enforce it stronger than other companies, but I think that's a really common company policy.
Yeah, I see too, like recruiters are more willing to share after they've built some trust with the traveler, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think of yourself as a recruiter, you talk to a dozen new travelers every day, and only a fraction of those will eventually work for you. And so you have to be like, do I really want to go all out and do, like you were saying, educate the traveler on that topic and break the company rules of sharing the bill rate for somebody that could just completely leave me, go to a different recruiter, Very different than if you've like, been working on contracts together for years and like you're like really good friends on and offline. You're like, oh yeah, like the bill rate's $80,
Yeah. Yeah.
versus,
Yeah, there's perks for sure to establishing like a true relationship with a recruiter like that. And I mean, if us as travelers, if we put ourselves in the shoes of the recruiter and pretend like we have like 50 travelers in front of us that we have to talk to throughout that week or whatever, and you can choose let's just even pretend like you could choose as a recruiter. It's not even the policy. You as a recruiter can choose. You might not, as a recruiter, just tell all 50 of them what the bill rate is, because you can imagine if half of them haven't really traveled very long and you say, hey, the bill rate's $85, they're going to be like, great, it's $85. And you'll be like, oh yeah, but you're making 55 or 60 or whatever it is. And they'll be like, wait, you just said the bill rate was 85. It's just such a confusing conversation for someone who hasn't already done their own education. So I think recruiters not giving that information without it being asked is totally normal and makes sense to me. So if a recruiter's not sharing the bill rate just by default, not a red flag, not weird. They're going to probably wait for a traveler to ask them. And then even so, if the traveler's asking them, but there's, like you said, no rapport. Let's pretend like you haven't even talked to the traveler on the phone and they just wrote you an email and they say, what's the bill rate for this job I saw on your job board? There's probably no way that recruiter is going to share that with them. It could be anybody. It could be a company trying to figure out what bill rates other companies are paying. It could be, a traveler doing that for another agency. It could be you don't know how much the traveler knows about bill rates and where is that conversation going to go. You haven't built any rapport at all. You don't even know if that traveler is eligible to travel and they want to know about this like nuanced thing of the bill rate. And so it's not something that I think makes sense that a recruiter would just answer casually because of how complex it can be. And especially if their company says you're not allowed to share it. Why in the world would they just answer an email and share that? Or a first phone call when the traveler hasn't shown their resume or built any rapport at all, and they want that to be the first question answered. So in the way that the industry works today, it's not common for the recruiter to just share that ad hoc, casually.
Yeah.
It is usually something that needs a little bit more trust built up between the traveler and the recruiter, for the recruiter to know, the traveler doesn't have bad intentions where they're trying to steal jobs from them and give them to other agencies. That's the more like proprietary competitive part. Or that the traveler just has a baseline of knowledge where it's not going to be this exhausting conversation. And that the traveler is actually a real traveler. Because if the traveler is not even eligible to travel yet, or they're not going to travel for 2 years, that's a long, nuanced conversation to have with someone who's not even really going to get a job anytime soon.
Yeah.
So those are some things to think about in general of why recruiters might not share it just like as they go. One more thing I think of when I put myself in the facility and the recruiter's shoes, which I like to share that on this podcast because I think that's the part of the equation travelers understand the least. They understand why they want to know the bill rate, but understanding the complexities of why they might not always get to know it can be more confusing. But for if it's a staffing agency that has direct relationships with facilities, and those are the most sacred, the most exciting, the best, which means you're not going through a middleman company that holds a whole bunch of jobs and then you have access to the jobs, but so does everyone else. A direct contract means you have a direct relationship with one facility, so you can negotiate your own bill rates. You don't get to do that when you go through the middleman VMS, but you do get to do that when it's a direct relationship. And maybe only you, or maybe only you and a couple other staffing agencies has that relationship, so it's more special. So that means if a traveler comes to your company, you have something unique to offer them. That actually is harder work. It takes a while to write up those contracts. And when you have those, you don't want the other staffing agencies to know, oh, here is a facility I could go call up and get my own direct contract. You don't want to make that easy for them.
Yeah.
So if you were that staffing agency that had a special relationship with a direct contract, you probably don't just want to display publicly, here's this facility looking for travelers, here is the bill rate that they're willing to pay. because it's not usually beneficial to the travelers to know that information so much as the other staffing agencies. And if they see, oh, there's an $85 bill rate, great. I'll just call them and tell them, go through me. I'll do it for $80 bill rate and try to wipe other people out. That is starting this bidding war that we call the race to the bottom, which doesn't serve anyone. It doesn't serve the staffing agency and it doesn't serve the travelers because now they're going to have to get paid less for that facility. And so sometimes there's actually a decent reason that the staffing agency is like, I don't want to share the bill rate. That's something I worked hard for. I want to keep it private. I don't want other staffing agencies to take this special relationship from me. But it's less needed, in my opinion, to hide the bill rate when it is a VMS job, because those tons of agencies have access to them. They're not as secretive. Everyone has the same bill rate.
Exactly.
That doesn't have the same logic behind it of like, oh, you can't see this bill rate. That bill rate is what it is. And then within that bill rate, the companies have to decide how much they're giving the traveler versus how much they need to keep to run their business. And that's where the differences come in. So as a traveler, you got to figure out, well, what are you paying me? That's what you really care about. It's interesting to hear what the bill rate is, but you want to know, well, who's going to pay me the most on this bill rate?
Yeah. At the end of the day, what matters probably the most in that equation is what's on your paycheck, right? How much are you pulling in, and how does that compare with other offers that you can get?
Yeah.
And that's where it's super helpful for a tool like our pay comparison tool, for example, where you can take your offer you get from a recruiter, even recruiters you don't get from Nomadicare, but Nomadicare, non-Nomadicare recruiters, and you can plug it in and say, how does this compare to the other offers that travelers are seeing out there? And so you can kind of see like, okay, am I getting paid fair, regardless of what the bill rate is, right? It's incredibly helpful because you have data to compare it against.
Yeah, love that. I think that's the number one resource that a traveler can use for their perspective, even more than knowing a bill rate, which is interesting for sure. And it helps build rapport with the recruiter. But just comparing pay packages is our weapon.
Yeah.
Weapon, I say that casually, but it's like our tool to help us not get taken advantage of. Just talk to a couple of recruiters and see what different people are offering. And that's your advantage. Your advantage is actually hearing what people are willing to pay you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Knowing the bill rate doesn't change that piece of the equation.
And you're never going to know the bill rate to every single job you're interested in. You're just statistically, you're not going to find a recruiter for every job who's going to tell you what the bill rate is, but you're 100% going to know what the pay package is for each job.
Yeah.
Eventually every recruiter will tell you what that pay package is. And that's where you can compare it to the market and see what's out there.
Yeah, totally. And the one on Nomadicare, what you're doing is you're typing in, let's say someone's offering you $2,100 a week. You put in $2,100, you put in the location, and it'll tell you how that compares to the average pay packages across in your specialty across dozens of different companies, not just one. So you can see, well, am I getting paid 30% more than average, 12% more than average, 11% below average? You at least get a good ballpark. Is this a good offer for this area in general? So it gives you like a good starting point to see how it compares. I love that tool.
Yeah, and even for our therapists, listeners out there, you can even filter it by setting. Because setting completely different, right? It's almost like a different specialty. And they pay differently too. Skilled nursing versus schools versus home health. And so you can kind of like fine tune it to be like, okay, I want to compare it to other offers travelers are seeing for OT home health in Florida.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. Well, cool. Well, great question. Really good question. Super fun one to talk about.
Yep.
Thank you. Well, thanks for listening to episode number 10 of the Nomadicare Show. Please like and subscribe and follow along to keep learning more about this industry, becoming an empowered traveler. And as always, go to nomadicare.com, find a vetted recruiter, and use all of our free tools to help make sure you're getting paid fair. See you next time.
Yeah.
Never been here before, but I feel like I'm home. Yeah. Put my feet on the road, meet me over the coast. We got places to go. Yeah.